I've been doing this for 12 years and I'm not satisfied.
People don't love to listen to other people's opinion until they realize it themselves.
Everything's going to take way longer than you think. Whatever your idea of success is, double, triple your timeline.
I'm sure there were some times where you just wanted to give up, or some hardest times of all this journey.
The journey was pretty insane.
Rob's adventure began with a simple yes to building a website in college, a skill he and his friends didn't even have.
Surprisingly, this led to a services business that hit $1 million in revenue in its first year.
I love founders who have a bootstrapping background because there's so much risk. From day one, you're focused on, can I feed myself? Can I pay my rent? We had 5 founders. That's super weird.
Wow, that's a lot. And everybody was on the same page.
And everyone was on the same page. I think I had this fluency with technology that just a lot of people don't have the privilege to have access to at a very young age. In the early days, you had to do all kinds of stuff to just get on the internet. You were basically a hacker by default.
The newer generation, computer illiterate, from a technical point of view.
That is something that still scares me to this day. I have an answer for this question, and it's basically...
The Avenue of the Strongest is a podcast dedicated to exploring the lives and experiences of the most inspiring individuals from around the world. Each episode features interviews with fascinating guests who share their insights and wisdom on a variety of topics, including education, impact, motivation, health, and learning. Here are your hosts, Anayet Chowdhury and Vlad Suleiman.
Rob, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, likewise. Great to be here. Good to meet you all. And I guess we're neighbors, so.
Yeah, we are neighbors right here in Brooklyn, in the lovely New York City. I'd love to start at the beginning of your story, and this is fascinating because I think a lot of our stories overlap, but we'll get more into that later on. But I kind of want to take you all the way from the beginning. I understand your father was a CTO of a bank in Italy, and you actually lived in Italy from when you were 5 to 13 years old. So I kind of want to start off here. That's pretty unique. How did that shape your worldview, and what key values did you carry from that early experience into your business life?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get that question a lot when I share that, how it shaped me. I was a kid. It was just my life. I was never experiencing it as something unique or something special. And honestly, don't reflect on it maybe as much as I should. But ultimately, I went to an American school in Milan, Italy. And the school is more of an international private school. So it wasn't all Americans there. There weren't very many at all, actually. It was mostly people from many different countries and some from Italy. And it was in retrospect, it was certainly unique in that sense. You have exposure to every different culture, really. And I think that introduces an open-mindedness about how the world should work, because there's no singular way. And also the school does a good job of celebrating each, even though it's an American school, it was truly an international school. So that certainly is carried over. I've never felt like there's one way to do something or there's one way to live in this world, because I know that's just not true.
Right.
The most important part is, did you learn to enjoy life as all Italians do?
Yeah. So growing up in Italy, there's certainly exposure to that kind of lifestyle, and where priorities lie are certainly different. And frankly, there was some culture shock in me sort of returning to the US. And I did have an internship in Italy while I was in college, and that work experience was drastically different from my work experience here. I think because of that, I think life is something that's not just about work. In a lot of other countries, where in the US, I think certainly is. So that's definitely a thing. The other thing about going to this school in particular is it was very tech forward. So aside from my dad being a CTO, there was a laptop mandate when I was in 6th grade. So everyone had to have a laptop, which is an incredible privilege. That's really the first time I can remember really starting to be interested in technology in a way beyond just like playing video games. I would tear apart my laptop and then rebuild it. I was super interested in buying RAM and upgrading it, and we would play Counter-Strike in class. We weren't allowed to do that, but you would set up peer-to-peer networks. So that was my first exposure to like setting up something technically on the internet, and we build websites sometimes. So yeah, I had this incredible early exposure to technology in my life through school, but then my dad being a CTO, there was basically always technology around the house. There was always something for me to play with, always something new I was being introduced to. So I think I had this fluency with technology that just a lot of people don't have the privilege to have access to at a very young age,
Yeah.
let alone an experience that I think kept me open-minded about the world. So
Oh my God. When you said Counter Strike, it brought me so much memories, from my school age. Oh my God. Everybody was skipping classes to go, in school we didn't have any computers. I mean,
mhm.
in my country, and we had like computer cafes when you come and
Yeah,
you just go to internet, and oh my God, everybody was just running there to, and also what was it? QuickTime? Did you was it?
QuickTime.
Yeah,
I don't know.
was it
So I,
the
I
game
actually
like this? QuickTime?
wasn't. I was terrible at Counter Strike, so I kind of didn't get too into gaming. At least PC gaming. I was definitely more involved in my N64. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that was definitely an era, right?
Yeah.
The early days of online gaming was pretty cool, and yeah, internet cafes were a thing, and still are in some countries. So um, yeah, that's
It's
super cool.
I know I'm steering this conversation in completely different directions, but just this discussion sparked something along in my mind. The newer generation, I'm talking about students who are or kids who are like 10 years old now, 10 plus. And I know I hate making blanket statements, but I think I've read studies where they're actually like computer illiterate if from a technical point
Yeah,
of view.
Right now?
Yeah, so although they have iPads and tablets, you have to understand iPads, it's just a button. You're swiping stuff. You're not really going and deep diving like when we had
Right.
to do the IP configs and set up AOL and dial up and Verizon and all that kind of crazy stuff. We've built websites. We've done a lot of the, quote unquote back end stuff, but there's reports coming out for many years now that shows like although these students, young students, have access to technology at a much younger age, it's quote unquote, they're actually computer illiterate. Uh, converting things from doc to PDF file. Again, I know it's a general statement. I hate making these kind of statements.
no, I'm not surprised to hear that, to be honest. If you, it makes perfect sense if you think about it. The last 15 years of my career has been about making technology more accessible to the
Accessible
average
easier,
person.
yeah.
And a large portion of that work is to obscure the the technical aspect of things into the and move it into the background. So what most people are using is the simplest form of technology that there is. You're
Yeah,
obfuscating everything, so that makes a lot of sense. And you also see that, and it was a surprise to me because yeah, when you in the early days, you had to do all kinds of stuff to just get on the internet, or you were basically a hacker by default if you wanted to use technology because it just wasn't at the state in a state where anyone could use it. You had to learn. Whereas now it's presented in a way where you don't. It's very intuitive, which is amazing, but I can see how that might result in quote unquote computer illiteracy. So, I mean, maybe it's better to call it like technical illiteracy or something like that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just different times. I mean,
Yeah,
remember how many times we were reinstalling operation system? I was
yeah,
reinstalling it a couple times a month,
I
switching
know.
from 2000 to XP and then vice versa. I mean,
Yeah,
and it was right now it's what? It's like just one button to reinstall it and it's just doing everything itself. But before you have
yeah,
to go
exactly.
inside and do something.
You
Yeah, and those
I,
processes gave you exposure to how maybe some of the inner workings of a computer, or what the inner workings of a computer were, because you got to see basically how the computer, it was a process, and you were essentially introducing new pieces of information for the computer to essentially reinstall the operating system, and it just kind of gave you some clues into how things worked. Whereas now, genuinely, you click a button and it just does everything for you. They just
Right.
show you a little bar, so you're like, oh, it's just loading. But
Right.
no, it's like erasing stuff. It's like moving files around so it can rewrite portions of your hard drive, and then it's
Yeah.
moving everything back. It's like doing all these complicated functions that we used to have to do step by step, like load a CD, put another CD in. It's interesting, but it makes sense. Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by ArgoPrep, an award-winning educational publisher serving over 1 million students nationwide. If you're a kindergarten to 8th grade teacher or principal, be sure to check out our supplementary workbooks to get your students ready for standardized state testing. We cover all subjects from kindergarten to 8th grade. Use the coupon code AVENUE for a 25% discount off of all purchase orders. Visit us today at argoprep.com/store.
One of the broader topics, if I go extend beyond that, not to get all dark here, but of course, we have incredible LLM models out there now. AI is capable of the cost of intelligence has come down, to literal pennies. I'm just thinking of society as a whole. As things get easier and easier and simpler and simpler, and you add on the fact that maybe 10 years from now that we'll also have a lot of self-driving cars, that we'll lose a lot of these skills. Like I know, really. But if you look fast forward to 20 years, what do we become as a society? As a whole, does our problem-solving skills decline? I mean, it's already studies are showing that. So that's kind of
You
the
speak
trend
like
we're
an old
going.
guy, Nayat.
Yeah, I know, I know. But you know what?
I'm
Every
really
generation
sure
says that.
age here.
Every generation says that, and you know what? I'm
Yeah.
sure our parents thought the same thing, that we would be doomed forever. In fact, we're not. So let me go ahead and get back on track. Then let's talk about your first company. So,
Sure.
so I'd love to learn more about that. I understand that you started your first company technically in your junior year of college, right? How'd you meet your co-founders? What did the company do?
Yeah. And I feel like starting a company at that time is a very generous description for what we were doing. But I went to Syracuse University. I was a networking major. So how the internet works essentially is you have routers and switches, and they relay information back and forth to each other. So I was configuring those devices, and there was like this separate program though that involved entrepreneurship. So Syracuse had a big entrepreneurship push, and there was a class called Idea to Startup. And there were some kids in my program that wanted to take it. We had previously done a competition together to build something for MLB Network, and we won the competition. So we knew we liked working together, but we entered into this class. We didn't have an idea, but we were the only 3 people in the class that could actually build things. Everyone else just had ideas, which is fine. That was the point of the class. So our idea was to just build all of their ideas and try to charge them for it, which was terrible because they didn't have any money. I think we made a grand total of like $1,500 from that initial business, so quote unquote. But through that, we met some other people in the area that saw some potential in us, and we brought on another founder essentially, who is now the CEO of Density, our latest venture. And he helped drum up some more business, which really sparked our first agency. And our general model at the time was to take all profits and start other software companies to generate some passive revenue for the business. We were trying to emulate a business called 37 Signals. They built Basecamp and a few other products, and they were super popular at the time. I'm sure we weren't the only ones doing this, but it worked. We ran that for 2 years. Within the first real year of doing business, we did over $1 million, which for us was ridiculous. And
Of course.
Living in Syracuse, you're also able to pay yourself very little. It was a great environment for us to just learn. And we were roommates, we were business partners. All we did was work. And eventually, one of those things that we built, one of those companies that we built with our profits became our big venture, and really what we spent the last 8 years building, or the subsequent 8 years building, which was density.
You know, it's a very important part here that I heard that you kept reinvesting your profits. Why didn't you spend all your profits on some cool stuff? Where did you get
Some cool
this
stuff.
this idea of reinvesting? Because a lot of people, they would just, especially with their first profits, they would go run to clubs, I don't know, buy a car, this, that, but not
Yeah.
reinvest back to the company.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why we didn't spend our money on ourselves. I think we were just ambitious, and we wanted to. We felt like we could do something more impactful than just what we were doing in the immediate. So it felt quite natural to build something bigger than ourselves, and I think that's always been our goal. It's something that maybe you can also relate to, but you kind of get addicted to, is this idea of putting something out in the world that's not you, that other people participate in. You kind of start to like it, and I think it just made more sense for us to be investing in that than investing in our immediate selves. So yeah, but why? I don't know. That's actually like a really good question, because it wasn't even a discussion. It was just what we all defaulted to doing. And I think in this sense, I'm really lucky. We had 5 founders.
Wow, that's a lot.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, that is a lot.
So that's super weird.
And everybody was on the same page.
And everyone was on the same page.
Wow, that's
And
unheard of, actually. That's pretty rare to hear.
Yeah, and we still work together to this day as business partners. Wow,
that's amazing.
And we're on the same page.
Truly, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's just this weird stroke of luck where we just
it is
like-minded. We push each other in really positive ways. We're vulnerable with each other, and it's friendship and it's partnership, and the lines don't get blurred. Like, we're able to manage that really well. And I don't know, very lucky. That's a good question. Yeah,
it's it is definitely luck. There's nothing else that can answer that question, because it's a very similar story here. We have I have two, so Vlad and then his brother. We're like, it's exactly the same situation as you. We've been doing it for almost 10 years, and we've also never took our money and partied. We've reinvested our capital massively and underpaid ourselves. For the first 5 years, honestly, in the first 5 years, we started 3 different companies. By year 4, all of them that were doing 7 figures in revenue, and we paid ourselves, believe it or not, $3,000 a month. After the 4th year, we were paying ourselves just to barely make rent, because we were aggressively reinvesting the capital to acquire the preschool, to go ahead and start everything else, to go ahead and expand our team, to go ahead during the hard times to not lay off, or at least delay layoffs by at least 6 to 12 months, because businesses go up and down, up and down. It's always a cycle. It's always a cycle. We experienced high times, we've experienced low times, but we're always because we're bootstrapped, we always made sure to have capital allocation in the bank and assets to make sure that we don't die off. But yeah, it's pure luck. I can't, like, people ask me so many times, and we've met plenty of people that are miserable with their partners or co-founders. They make money, they make a lot of money, but they're miserable.
Yeah, totally.
And it also all came just naturally to us. I mean, nobody was teaching us, like, you have to reinvest this or that. It was just, it was just there.
Yeah.
So
maybe you thank your parents or your upbringing. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I don't
maybe,
know.
or just the fear to lose everything after you build it.
Okay. So this is my question. So, right. I think some of that is protecting what you've built. I think this is something that people who bootstrap, I love founders who have a bootstrapping background, because there's so much risk from day one. You're focused on, can I feed myself? Can I pay my rent? The second you get any amount of success, you realize you're overworked. You bring on a person. Now it's not, can I feed myself? Can I help that person feed themselves, feed their family, and pay their rent? And all of a sudden, all of your fear goes from yourself into other people and this other thing. And I think you have this remarkable appreciation for how fragile that is, because you know all the sacrifices you made up until that point to get there, and how at any moment it always feels like it can kind of just go away, and you want to basically hoard cash so that whenever
Right.
something gets weird, you don't want to deal with that existential threat. Um,
That, that's a
would
great
you
word.
say like that's sort of your mentality?
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The word fragile, you've described it perfectly. Actually, that's
I
the
mean, even after 10
emotion.
years, we feel it.
I still feel fragile to this day. It doesn't make sense.
And maybe for
Yeah.
somebody, when they come and see, I mean, all our companies, this, that, how we do it, for them, it will not be fragile, but it still feels like that. I
Yeah.
wonder when it's going to go away.
Yeah.
Maybe in another 10 years or 5 years. I
Yeah.
have a
Well,
question here. So with Density, you grew the company from just idea to billion-dollar company valuation. I'm sure there were some times where you just wanted to give up, or some hardest times of all this journey. Could you please remember one of them and share with us?
Yeah. Yeah. So Density was 8 years. The company's still operating. I left. I'm still on the board. And so at some point I decided I wanted to switch gears, which we can get into, but the journey was pretty insane. I'm still I think processing all of the things, but one of the most surprising things to me that came from that journey was how challenging dealing with momentum can be. And so momentum has a good and a bad to it, in that it can help you move fast. When you're feeling the momentum, you're thinking less, you're just doing, you're feeling good. But it can also create blinders to maybe things you should be focused on, or there's like an over optimism that can creep in because you're feeling buoyed by everything around you. And I think that was the most surprising thing, is how hard it gets to then move that ship and be nimble. And we were a hardware business. We were software people building a hardware business. So the time frames we were used to operating in for changing momentum no longer applied, where you had to commit to something and you had to make that work for at a minimum of 8 months, because you had a product and inventory that you had to get off of your shelf. So that is something that still scares me to this day, and it's why we are so dogged about building good foundation, because we see how hard it can be to, one, check back in on your foundation, and two, pivot. And if you're trying to pivot off of a bad baseline, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of headache. And we had a couple of hard resets that we had to do, both from a product perspective, from a team perspective. And I think that was mostly due to us maybe making that decision a bit too late, because we just felt like we had some forward momentum. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe that's too
no, it
abstract.
makes sense completely. Tell me a little bit about your product. So what was the hardware?
Sure.
What was a flagship? It was what exactly is it? So we can
Yeah. So taking
understand
a
better.
step back, so Density sells analytics to corporate real estate businesses to help them optimize their square footage and their space. And we do this by selling them what is functionally a people counter. You put it in a room, it sits passively, using radio signal, counts how many people are in a space, and then we compile all the aggregate spaces into analytics that is delivered through software to a real estate team.
So that's the hardware you're speaking about, the one
Right.
that counts how many people are going at what time, and so on and so forth, right?
Exactly. And so the passive thing that sits in a room that I just described is the fourth iteration of that product. It started as a Wi-Fi based people counter. That's what we initially raised money on. That's what we initially sold to a market. We had a general go-to-market concept that supported that kind of product, and realized it didn't work at all. So we built a different version, which was a break beam counter. So you'd stick it on either side of a doorway.
Mm-hmm.
Two lasers would shoot across to another, to a receiver, and then you would tell direction by which beam was broken first. If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But you have an issue with occlusion. So if you have two people walking next to each other, that's a problem.
Right.
So we had a huge public launch with this product. And this is what I mean about momentum is there was all this interest in our product. We had a successful capital raise. And so it felt like we had to go to market with what we had. It didn't feel like we had any other option. When in hindsight, probably should have spent a little bit more time validating what we were doing and going to market in a real way with something we were more confident in. So we had
How much did you raise altogether?
Altogether, I always get the number wrong, but it's upwards of 180 million, 200 million.
And how long did it pass since before you raised?
So that's a good question. Before we raised, so it was actually, we raised in 2015. We started the company in theory, or we started building the product in 2013, and we were paying for everything from our agency. So we were actually self-funding the first few iterations of R&D and testing with different customers in our area. So we had done a lot before we even fundraised. And I think that often goes unnoticed. I think to our investors even, I don't think they even realized how much time and money we had already put into the product. And there were contingencies too to basically focus full time on the product. I mean, every investor is going to sort of demand that. And that actually in that moment felt kind of bad because it's really all this other work we were doing that even enabled this thing's existence. And we kind of just had to throw all that away, which was fine. It was the right decision. But anyway.
How many employees did you have when you reached
at a peak?
Yeah, the peak when you reached the bill.
It was at 120 people. And that's around when I left. So we went through the pandemic and had sort of a business boom. And for me, it was an opportunity to either hunker down and really be there another 5 infinite amount of years. I don't think you really should put a cap on it, especially as a founder, or an opportunity to maybe check in on what I cared about. The company felt like the company was in a great place, and maybe I could step back and do something else. And I decided to do that. And ultimately that to me was to focus on the early stages of building things again. You brought up like how I met my founders, and that journey was one of personal discovery too. It was actually at that competition I mentioned where I found design and I found my joy for building things. I had never in my life up until that point felt the kind of focus or like the dopamine rush that I got when I was building this website for MLB.com. I just never felt that in my life before. And ultimately that's what I'm chasing every single day of my life, is that feeling again, basically.
That's funny. That is very,
when
it's
a
very
company
similar
gets to
we're
120
product people.
Sorry?
So you don't like sales and marketing? Because we hate sales and marketing. Me and Vlad. That's why we're not that's why we're not valued at $1 billion valuation.
Yeah.
We are product obsessed. When we're working on product, we love it. I don't want to hear about anything else.
Yeah, there's an element of that. I've certainly changed my tune. I think I've sort of convinced myself that maybe I do like it a little bit, because
I need to like it.
Yeah, I need to like it. And I think there are parts of it that product people can really contribute to on that front, and often perform better than a classical salesperson. So it's why I do trend enterprise, because I think it's better suited for my skill set, where it's more of an intimate sales motion, depending on the product, of course. But I tend to enjoy that, where you're building a relationship, you're building trust with somebody, and ultimately you're just trying to solve their problem. It's on the consumer side where I feel it's so transactional, it's so really psychological or impulse driven. I think that's where I start to lose interest, because it's all about psychology, and I like mechanics that I can understand, and people are hard to understand. So
after Density, you decided to pivot and opened up the new company, right, Brett?
Yeah, exactly. So I stepped away. It took me forever to leave. I went down to part-time. It was my whole identity was wrapped up in this business, and I was head of product at the time, so we had to find a replacement, and it took a while. But I started working directly with some founders that were in my network and helping them bring their product to market. And I think I realized just how much I loved doing that, and had this idea just to basically rinse and repeat. So before Density, we were a services business and invested in net new products. And I just felt like that's something maybe I wanted to try again, albeit do it better this time. And there was also an element of venture or direct capital investment I thought we could layer in that would give us another way to help early stage businesses. So I started doing that. And then slowly some of my other co-founders started to leave Density as well for very similar reasons, really just wanting to get back to doing something at a more foundational level. And one started a dating application. One joined me to help with this one of these founders, and the other was the last to leave, and he joined Bread about a year ago. But so slowly but surely started pulling the band back together, essentially.
Yeah.
And underlying all of that was just a desire to, okay, well, if we don't want to work on Density, which is our thing, we definitely want to work together. And in the end, I think anything we do moving forward is just a means to fund our ability to work together. Like that's genuinely
That's
what
beautiful.
it comes down to.
That's really that's a very, those are some very nice words. So so tell me a little bit more about Bread. So what is Bread
Sure.
doing? So I know that you guys are or is it a partnership? Are you guys providing funding for early stage entrepreneurs? Is it a seed round? What does it look like?
Yeah, one way to think of it is we're basically bootstrapping a venture fund. So we started,
Okay.
and that's in hindsight. I'm able to say that in hindsight. We didn't really know what we were doing at the outset. We were just trying to help people. So ultimately, we love working with early stage founders, a lot of which maybe have some amount of capital, but they're trying to get to their Series A, or they just raised their
Right.
Series A and they're trying to really move fast and get to market in a high quality way. And we have a lot of experience building teams, designing and launching product, refining a sales motion, refining a pitch deck for fundraising. And it's all of these things that we try to help early stage founders with. The bulk of the work comes in form of building product. So it could be an idea, or you have a prototype, and we will try to inject a higher level of design into your brand and business. We will try to zero in on what is exactly the thing your customers need from a product perspective, and then we will ship that probably faster than most, and in a way that's, I think, built with solid foundations that'll help you pivot in the future. And then beyond that, again, helping fundraise, helping close deals, whatever it is to make you successful. So that's really where Bread focuses. The other weird thing that's come up just from being in business now for 2 years is internal tooling. So every business, when it starts to scale, has internal processes that helps them do that. A lot of them end up manual, or they're living in spreadsheets. And many of them have an opportunity to either save a lot of time or save a lot of money and people resources if they automate portions of it. And this is something we had to do a lot at Density, because there were algorithms we had to train. There were a lot of scoping exercises, like people had to select where sensors needed to go on maps. There were review materials to test the accuracy of the algorithms. So we had to build a lot of internal tooling to help the business operate in a way that was sane for any human to manage. So we love these kinds of problems. And so slightly more mature businesses, or businesses that are maybe at their core services businesses, but with a little bit of technology to help them run internally, can really productize that service. Yeah. Those are things we really have found a lot of success with in helping founders sort of multiply themselves, or just run a better operated company. So, and
how does a model are they paying you a monthly fee? Are you injecting capital and you're taking % of the company? I just try to understand the business model itself.
Yeah, all of the above. So we only operate on a retainer basis. essentially you're bringing us on as your like temporary founders or
Got it.
temporary
Okay, I see.
CTOs, and we're just trying to solve the most important problems for your business in
That makes sense.
as short of time as possible, but also then helping replace ourselves. So we bring a hiring playbook and help you build out the team for your future. There are cash equity splits sometimes if we really believe in the business, and maybe there's not as much of an ownership opportunity from a direct cash investment. We will do cash equity splits. And then of course we are actively fundraising for our venture fund, where we'll just write checks directly into a business, whether we're
Right.
involved in the operation or not.
How do you assess the company and decide which company you would like to work with?
Yeah, so that's the other thing. We're super picky, even for paying clients, not just for companies that we invest in. And we basically go through a venture-like assessment for all the businesses that we work with. We look at their market. We meet the founders. We often find working with founders is the best way to even vet them, because you always get
Right.
a pitch, you get a presentation, but watching founders work in reality often reveals a different side of them. That's, I think, important. So we'll do these short sprints typically with founders up front to help understand their business better, help them understand their problem better. That is a mechanism for us to either reject any future work, for them to reject us as well. But that's sort of step one in validating a company is worthwhile. And then step two is we will look at the market, we'll look at their existing product, we'll look at competition, we'll do a full assessment of the business. And if we feel like there's one, opportunity, and two, opportunity for us to help, opportunity for the business, but also we don't want to force fit ourselves. We want to be valuable. We want to feel like we're helping. So at times we will just say, hey, I don't think this is the right time for you. I think maybe try to do stuff on your own, or maybe there's a different approach to solving this problem, and we'll make those kinds of recommendations, usually coming out of that initial sprint.
Is there any minimum requirements on the revenue the company should have in order to come on board? Or
No, so we've worked with, obviously some amount of capital is required to pay our engineers or designers or us to support, but no, there are no hard revenue requirements. We've worked with people who genuinely have zero to nothing and help them get to a place where they're at least able to pitch venture capital teams to get funding. We've also worked with post Series A businesses that are just looking to capture more of their market share. So we've worked really with everyone in between. We've even had an enterprise client or two that we've helped with some internal applications. So no requirement from revenue. We really focus on the team. There's some financial requirement on their part, of course, but we try to make our engagement work within their constraints.
Got it. And you also mentioned the concept called boring magic when discussing foundational yet overlooking products. Can you break down what that means and why do you believe it's often, used as unsexy solutions to carry the greatest potential?
Yeah. So this is, I think, buoyed by our experience in the prop tech space, which I think is a classic example of a boring industry, in that it's for whatever reason resistant to technological change or adoption. And it's usually like this because there's a lack of incentive, but also because it requires years of experience to really understand how it works, or how deals are made, how technology can be adopted. It's typically under-resourced from a technology perspective. So that is a good example of a boring industry. PropTech has gone through their cycle, so they're probably moving past that stage of like being a boring industry. I think people know there's space to innovate within that world, but there are still other industries that are historically resistant. One example in a company that we just spoke to is in the brand marketing world, and typically you have big name athletes who get product deals, and that's how brands sort of build their marketing campaigns around these athletes. Enter social media and the influencer world. There's this underbelly of agencies that represent these athletes that should be shaking in their boots right now, because ultimately brands can now diversify their investment across any number of people to achieve the same amount of eyeballs. And one of these
Right.
places is in the collegiate world, given the new NIL rules, where college athletes can now be compensated.
Right.
And
Right.
so now sports marketing brands, not the agencies, but brands, in theory, could go directly to these earlier stage athletes for a better price, but reach a same level of audience. This is not something your average person on the street is thinking about. This is a
Right.
inner workings of an intimate world that's typically represented by industry experts that are negotiating brand deals for athletes. There's a company that's essentially removing all that by building a platform that allows these brands to select up and coming and emerging collegiate athletes. So they can take the $2 million they're paying, insert athlete name here, and they can
Right.
spread that across many different athletes with even more precision around who they're targeting. So the other benefit of college is they tend to be local in their impact, and their age group tends to be specific as well. So you have more insight even into who's following these people, and potentially more value given to these brands. So enter just a single piece of technology that's essentially giving you analytics and also presenting you athletes that are trending in a certain direction. You can now remove these agencies. And this is billions of dollars in industry that these agencies are representing, that essentially can be displaced with software. So that's a long example, but that's an example of an industry we get excited about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you share an example of the most successful case within the years of having Bread?
The most successful case. So I would say there's probably one outcome that is most exciting. It's in the Web3 space. So there's an authentication provider in the Web3 world, and they have now, I think, taken the majority of market share. But we were sort of part of that journey. And when they first came on board, joined the Bread ecosystem, we like to say, they were probably second to another business. And for them, I think we saw that they had incredible talent. Their engineering team was amazing. They were clearly focused on the right things from a product perspective, but it felt like they had a bit of a market problem. You could call it a brand problem, but it was really just, how do you enable this weird Web3 audience that's not traditionally enterprise, but you still need to be closing enterprise-like deals? And I think we properly identified that it's in sort of the gateway, and how you get them to use your product and demo your product, and also make them feel like they can customize their product in a way that helped it resonate sooner, and ultimately feel like it was the future for them. Like, if they're going to invest in something like authentication, it's sort of a foundational part of your tech stack. And so I think we correctly identified that was their problem. So rather than us go full speed on any kind of product redesign or major product design investments, we focused more on the marketing side and made some adjustments to the marketing site, tried to just elevate their brand a little bit, which is to say they had some good core elements, but I think just they hadn't been working with a designer much, and so they started to go astray a bit. So just trying to bring it back to its home base and be a bit more mature of a business. And then we built a demo flow that allowed them to sign up, essentially use the product end to end, but customize it pretty thoroughly so that it looked, basically they would go through this demo and they had exactly what they were about to drop into their product. And then they could literally just drop in the configuration. So it drastically condensed their sales motion, and I think got them into more meaningful conversations faster. And then there was also some specific work for enterprise customers that we helped them do. So in any kind of enterprise deal, also, I'm talking so much, I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
But for any enterprise deal, what every business that starts out in the enterprise world doesn't realize yet, like if you're a founder just starting and you're in the enterprise space, is you're a services business. You are going to be doing custom work for your enterprise customers. And so I think that was the other lesson that we helped them learn and execute on, that ultimately landed them some big deals, and they're certainly a market leader now.
Rob, I want to bring it down and close this podcast by asking you two more questions.
Sure.
We'll keep it generic but great here. If you were sitting next to a young entrepreneur on a plane who's just starting out, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them that you wish you'd known early on?
Yeah, I have an answer for this question, and it's basically everything's going to take way longer than you think. Whatever your idea of success is, double, triple your timeline. In large part for the reasons we started the conversation with, because you think you do something, even if there is marginal success, you're not going to be if you're worth your weight in salt, you're not going to be taking that money for yourself. You're going to be putting that back into your business. So your dreams of like living on a beach, or if those are your motivations for starting a business, one, are probably misplaced, but two, you're very far away from that. And just be prepared to go along for a roller coaster of a ride and double your timeline. Everything
That is
takes
a
longer
very
than you think.
That's a very good answer.
And when did you
Very good
realize it?
answer.
After how many years in business?
When did I realize it? That's a good question. I think recently. I think it took me. I think
Only
it
after
took
10
me,
years.
12 years to realize that. Oh, I've been doing this for 12 years, and
Yeah.
I'm not satisfied. I don't feel I've accomplished what I set out to accomplish yet, and my expectation was definitely different going into it. I felt like success was always around the corner. I think my definition of success probably changed too along the way.
Yeah.
But
what is funny is that even though after 12 years of experience, you would advise to somebody like a new entrepreneur, but they will not realize it. They will say,
No.
Yeah.
and they will realize it 10 years later themselves.
Yeah.
People
Absolutely.
don't love to listen to other people's opinion until they realize
But
it
it's
themselves.
fine.
Of course.
It's
But
a
so
cycle we
what
have
I
to all go through.
what I hope with that advice, I would at least what I'd hope they take away is at least prepare yourself, or at least start to do things that you'll feel good about 10 years from now. Like that's the sort of way in which I think me and my partners got lucky, in that we kind of cared about those things. And it sounds like you all did too, where you made decisions that you wouldn't regret 10 years ago, that you can kind of stand on to help you continue forward 10 years from now. It's like reading a book about personal finance. It's like putting money into a Roth IRA. Like when someone told me that, I was 20 years old. I had no reason to think about retirement, but I was like, okay.
That's a perfect example. I knew about Roth IRA for forever, and all the math, and they show you, and it took us a long time before we contributed 1 penny to a Roth IRA or 401k or any kind of pension plans. Because when you're 20 years old, I mean, we're relatively, we started young. We also started at a junior of college. So I think like at 23, 24, when we even had money to stash away, we said, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean,
we got to be 60 years old, 59 and a
money.
half before we can touch this money. There's no way I'm putting 1 penny. And now today I regret it, because when you go back and you do those calculations of 7 years of missed payments, it really hurts the soul. But I knew it at that time. It's not like I didn't know.
At least we didn't spend this money. We reinvested back.
Sure,
if we would spend money on some
but
relaxation,
that's something I regret.
then okay.
That's something I regret.
I think we made more return on reinvesting into the company than Roth would give us.
I mean, sure, but
not so big regret.
Yeah, and
Rob,
also there's a matter of what you can and cannot do, like with the Roth example. But the point is, it's those kinds of things that can pay dividends. That I hope if you as a founder hear this enough times, you start to at least think about your decisions as 10-year decisions, as 20-year decisions.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. It's your career. The idea that you're going to be in this 5 years and be doing something else, or have too much money to worry about, day-to-day problems, just remove that idea from your mind.
Well, Rob, thank you for having a wonderful conversation with us. Can you please let our audience know where they can find you, any kind of information you want to share with us as well?
Yeah, sure. I have a website. It's called madebybread.com. You can find my work there, me, my partners, and our team at Bread. Me personally, you can go to my website, robertgrazioli.com. I'm always happy to field any questions from the internet. And if you're in New York, we'd love to grab a coffee as well. So that's really how I operate. I'm super open. Really don't hesitate to reach out. I know that's not something people always feel comfortable doing, but truly I will respond. That's where you can find me.
Rob, thanks so much for your time today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank
This
you.
was awesome.